Good afternoon, class. My name is Professor Ace, or Professor A, whatever one you want to call it, and welcome to Asexuality 102. So, this will be more of a continuation of Asexuality 101, where we take some of the more basic topics that you learned from Asexuality 101 and we go a bit deeper into them. So, let's start this out with some basic definitions. So, what is asexuality? Asexuality, very simply, is a sexual orientation that is described by a lack of sexual attraction. Follow-up question, what is sexual attraction? Quite simply, sexual attraction is a person's desire to have sexual relations with another person based on that person's gender or other characteristic. So, where does asexual fall into this? Well, it's described as more of a lack of attraction. So, for example, let's say you have two heterosexual people, you have a male and a female, and they feel sexual attraction towards each other, like they want to have sex with each other. They are sexually attracted to each other. We would call that heterosexual. Now, if it was two guys or two girls together, we would call that homosexual attraction. In the case of the females, it would be considered lesbian attraction, but it's all the same thing. So sexual orientation is just a more specific way of how you feel attraction towards somebody else. Now when we get to asexuality, the whole attraction thing towards another person is basically non-existent. Now there is some variation to where you can feel very low or after a specific bond, but we will get to that. So what is asexuality not? One thing that it is not is chastity. For those who don't know, chastity is the choice of not having sex before marriage.
So I want to make a quick note right now about the definition of chastity. I technically define what celibacy was, where you refrain from sex outside of marriage, i.e. abstinence. Chastity is much more of the strict definition of no sex at all. But for this purposes, they're basically the same thing, and they are both not asexuality.
Taking a vow of chastity would mean to not have sex at all. For example, a lot of monks take a vow of chastity, where they pledge to not have sex with anybody. That doesn't mean they are asexual. These two are not equivalent terms. Asexuality is how you are born. Some people are born straight, some people are born gay, some people are born pan. Well, you are not born chaste. Chaste is a choice. Asexuality is also not libido. That is what we call a sex drive. Now, your orientation has nothing to do with your sex drive. For example, two people could be in a heterosexual relationship, but they could both have really low libidos where neither of them want to have sex. Does that make them asexual? No, it doesn't, obviously. They're in a heterosexual relationship, but they just don't have much of a sex drive. That doesn't make them asexual. Now, libido we'll talk about a lot more in another lecture. Here's another thing that you should learn from Asexuality 101. Your orientation, your sexual orientation, is not matching your gender identity. These two are not the same terms. Orientation is how you feel towards other people. Gender identity is how you feel towards yourself. Identity is how you identify yourself. For some people, that would be male. Some people, that would be female. Some people, it would be non-binary. And people who are assigned one specific sex at birth, but their gender identity does not match, that can be considered broadly as transgender. But this is just a shallow dive into gender identity and all of that. That will not be covered in the course because that is not what asexuality is. This is just a brief overview. There are plenty of other lectures and other lessons going into great detail about this one statement right here. So go check it out if you are interested. So that's all well and good. So that's a basic overview of Asexuality 101. So now let's get into Asexuality 102 a bit. So earlier on I said asexuality is defined as a lack of sexual attraction or a very low sense of attraction. Now let's get into that. But first we're going to need to understand the whole entire scale of sexual attraction. And to do so, I am going to draw out a chart. I'm going to draw this as we go along, but so when it comes to what I'm about to draw, we need to get a couple terms down. So, for this purposes of this class, a spectrum is a simple line. Meanwhile, a grid is a 2D plane. That will come up real close. So, in the 1960s and 70s, there was the Kinsey scale. That started out on a scale of 0 to 6. Let me use a marker that is a bit easier to see. With 0 being pure heterosexual, and 6 being pure homosexual. Now, for the time, this was well enough. Most men either fell into the hetero end or the homo end, with most ended up being on the hetero side. And I say men because this was traditionally done with men, but some women also got this too. Well, this is all fine and good for people that are heterosexual and homosexual, and then we can slap around here a 3, which would be the midpoint here. That would be the bisexual category. People who fall in the middle. Well, really, if you're not here to here, that is a form of bisexuality. For example, here would be like heteroflux. That would be homoflux right around here. But taking this one, where would asexuality fit on this graph? Exactly, because it only goes from heterosexual to homosexual, with bisexual thrown in the middle. How's that really useful for this class? We don't exist on this spectrum. So that's why, and a couple other people also, have made instead a grid. Here's how that's going to look like. We're going to get rid of this. We're going to get rid of the 0 to 6s. We're going to put the hetero end here and the homo end here. So, the best, easiest way to make a 2D shape is to draw a second line. Now, what would these two be? Well, remember when I said pansexual earlier? Well, that's attraction towards all genders. Pan means all. So for this, we're going to put pan on the top. And if all is up on the bottom, none would be down here. So that would be asexual. So now we have an entire grid of what could fall in here. However, that's not entirely complete. Because, thinking about it, how can you be completely heterosexual right here but also be pansexual at the same time? That doesn't really make sense. So instead, we're actually going to draw another line right here on the outskirts of this. Same thing with the homosexual line, like that. I'm going to put this as the pure bisexual midpoint. Now naturally you would assume we would go down like this and make a diamond. However, that is not true, because right around here we're just going to put arbitrarily, we're just going to put demisexual. Arbitrarily, we're just going to put demi right here. Traditionally, when you have an asexual spectrum, demi goes right in the middle. Well, for those who don't know, demisexual is only experiencing sexual attraction after an emotional bond has happened. Now, we will go into great detail when we talk about that later on. But, for right now, if we drew it like this, that That leaves out Demi with not a lot of options to move. So, instead, it will look something like this. Not a direct corner, kind of a round off corner right there, because how can you be completely ace but also be completely straight or gay? So you have rounded edges. But you also have all this room right here for all the other orientations that you might feel that you have. We have our complete grid now. So where would a straightly heterosexual person identify? Where would they be? Well, they would be right here, at the heterosexual end. That's cool, but how about a purely pansexual person? Well, they would be right here. What if they are poly, where they feel attraction towards some, but not all? Well, they would be somewhere around in here. They could be this way or this way. They have all this space. They could say, well, I lean towards more of people that are not my gender, so I'm going to be more towards right here. But I also like people that are my gender as well, or people that don't follow the gender binary. You have all this space to deal with. The same thing when you deal with people who are asexual. For some people, they're mainly ace, but they also feel, well, I feel more some attraction towards people of my same gender, for example. Not me, but for example, you could feel like that one. Or, no, I'm purely ace all the way down here. I don't feel attraction towards anybody. Or you could be demi and you could be like, well, I'm mostly here, but then once I get that bond, I go this way, or I go this way. Now, it's important to know that some orientations, like demi, are not static. After an emotional bond has felt, that's when they can feel sexual attraction. That's when they might identify as this, or that's how they lean. They can also still be static and also just say, oh, I'm just demi. But using this grid instead of the original Kinsey scale is way more accurate to describe how people are attracted to other people. And this can help understand where pansexuality and asexuality fit in. Doing this can help explain a lot more, and people who are originally on this can identify, say, well, I don't really feel attraction, so I fall more actually right here. Or I feel less attraction towards people, but when it is, it's this way. So, long story short, you can fit in anywhere on this grid. Also to note, when I wrote the dashes, they could also be sexual, so like pansexual, but it could also be homoromantic. The sexual and romantic ones are identical. It's literally the same thing, just different suffix at the end of the prefix.
Okay, quick note there. I fumbled my words a bit. When I said they're the same, I was talking about how you would structure the words. They're in the scale, they're all the same. I was not implying that sexual orientation and romantic orientation are the same, because they are not, and that is something we'll talk about later.
So that'll be all for today, class. I hope I gave you a good review of what each orientation that we will be talking about is, and that you now understand how the Kinsey scale, which was okay for the time, needs to be adapted into a 2D plane to where more orientations can actually be identified and people can actually better express themselves. So, I'll see you in the next lecture, class. Have a good day.